Greetings, this is the Questing GM. So I'm back with another new prep quest video for our next chapter in Out of the Abyss, which is chapter 11, Gravenhollow. So finally we are coming to the first major location outside of Contogrim in the second half of the adventure. Naturally the next destination supposedly given to the PCs after the meeting with King Brueno Battlehammer in Contogrim, which is to tell them they find a way to get rid of the demon lords from the Underdark is to actually go to this stone giant library. According to the book at least, the PCs had to make a small minor detour to go to Mental Derif, where they will need to find a way to get some find a ring or find a magical item at least that will lead them towards Gravenhollow. And then finally now we are actually moving on to the next chapter, which actually takes them to Gravenhollow. So as usual, I'll be doing like a summary breakdown of the chapter in itself, which starts at page 150 on the module to page 159. So again, not a very long chapter, and not a lot of things happening within the chapter, truth to be told. It's actually a very, in terms of major events, it's actually a very, very short list, which I'll probably talk a little bit later on once I get into the more ideas and recommendations of what to do with the chapter. So starting off at page 150, there is a minor history about Gravenhollow. Basically, it's a library that was maintained by stone giants, and it supposedly is able to capture or record whatever has happened within the Underdark. Gravenhollow is not necessarily something that can be found just by tracking. There's no maps, and at least by the description, it only reveals itself to whoever is expected to find Gravenhollow. So the first section of the chapters talks about of going to Gravenhollow. How do you get there? And the book itself outlines basically three main methods as written. The first of all is Gazrim's ring, which is the ring that you're supposed to get from the Zentarim agent or representative within Mental Derif. And if you manage to get the Zentarim's corporation back in Contogrim, they will actually tell you that you're supposed to go and find Gazrim in Mental Derif, and he will pass you with the ring. So I guess that's probably the easiest or more conventional way to get to find Gravenhollow, and sort of like the quest line, the expected quest line the PCs are supposed to go through to get to Gravenhollow. But the other methods are the Society of Brilliance, which is a ragtag of Underdark denizens, and the PCs may encounter one of the members of the Society of Brilliance during the second half of their travels, especially during the travels from Contogrim to Mental Derif, which is actually a very, very long distance and back. So the suggestion here is that if any Society of Brilliance member who comes within a day's travel of the library can make an intelligence check DC 15 to find the passage leading to Gravenhollow. If this check fails, it can try again after 8 hours of searching contemplation. So I guess you could say these other methods being offered doesn't really hinge on the fact that the PCs must get the ring from the Zentarim. This is sort of like a contingency against, just in case if the PCs do not get the cooperation of the Zentarims back in Contogrim, if for whatever reasons you want to make that an optional thing, or they decided that they do not want to go to travel all the way to Mental Derif, all the way there to get that, or maybe the mission failed, because of what can happen within Mental Derif, especially if there's a kerfuffle between the Zentarims and the Drow, I believe, that Gazrim can actually get killed, and if the PCs decided not to search the body of Gazrim, then they would not be able to get the ring. So the third method to get into Gravenhollow is they have a stone giant guide, and I believe this stone giant guide is the one that you can only get if the PCs goes to Gracklstock, although in the book it says Stonespeaker Hargrim in Contogrim, which is I think it's a typo, because Stonespeaker Hargrim is actually the stone giant resident who actually lives in Gracklstock. So if for whatever reason that the PCs actually decide to travel to Gracklstock, during the second half of the adventure, then yes, then they can speak to the Soul Speaker Hagram to say that we need someone to lead us towards Gravenhollow Library, and then they will have to make a detour back from Greco-Stark back to get to Gonto Grim, and then from there to Gravenhollow. However, here is where I have to say that I actually made a deviation from finding for the PCs to find their way to Gravenhollow. As you may know, that I've already mentioned this a couple of times, at least in the previous videos. I've basically made the PCs go from Gonto Grim straight to Gravenhollow rather than having to go to Metal Darif, which I kept for later. So the method that I used that didn't need to use Gazan's Ring, and my PCs never encountered anyone from the Society of Brilliance, and obviously they wouldn't go all the way to Greco-Stark just to find a guide just to bring them to Gravenhollow. The item that I used as a substitute or in replacement of Gazan's Ring was actually the Stone Speaker Crystal. And if you remember back in the Greco-Stark chamber, the Stone Speaker Crystal is actually a gift from the Stone Speaker Hagram, who actually gives it to them if the PCs successfully solve the two-headed mystery in the Warstone Tunnels, and also if they save the rampaging stone giant, who in Greco-Stark as well as one of the major encounters. So I gave that as a reward after the PCs solved did the entire minor quest line for the stone giants in Greco-Stark, and I said that if with the Stone Speaker Crystal, you can actually spend the charges within it to actually get some vision or get some ideas, and that eventually led them to find Gravenhollow. And the PCs do not directly find themselves at the entrance or the tunnels that lead towards Gravenhollow. There's an interesting encounter that comes with the next section about going to Gravenhollow, which is about Veldishkar the Basilisk. So Veldishkar the Basilisk is basically a talking basilisk, which is supposed to be unusual because basilisks don't normally talk. And when the PCs encounter Vladishkar, he will tell Vladishkar will basically be the one who is being sent by the Librarians of Gravenhollow to lead the PCs to Gravenhollow itself. This is an encounter that it's rather optional in a way that if you feel like you don't want to really introduce this particular NPC, basically Vladishkar's role within Gravenhollow itself, he's mainly its protector, like it's its security chief in security, because if the PCs cause any trouble within Gravenhollow in itself, Vladishkar actually comes out and just petrifies whoever's causing trouble. You can definitely introduce Vladishkar the Basilisk in by leading them towards Gravenhollow, but if you feel that that's not what you need, or that's not necessary, then I don't see any reason why you can just not use Vladishkar at all. So after that, if Vladishkar leads the PCs to Gravenhollow, he will lead them to the gates of Gravenhollow, and basically from there, the book just basically describes what can be done or what happens or what can be seen within Gravenhollow. So it starts off with talking about some history of Gravenhollow and who are the local residents, which definitely be Vladishkar himself, and then there will be a whole bunch of Galabdurs who act as both servants as well as attendants to both the PCs or whoever or any visitors basically, and as well as the Librarians. So that's basically pretty much the security system within Gravenhollow. There's just a basilisk and a whole bunch of Galabdurs. So stat-wise, that may not prove to be a real challenge. So you may want to decide to increase, maybe include some earth elementals or stone golems, as they are few who there's a couple that actually guards the entrance of Gravenhollow itself. Then within the Stone Library section, they talk about the residents. So there are basically 3 librarians in Gravenhollow. There's Ulthar. Ulthar is the keeper of the past. Urmas is the keeper of the present, and Ustova is the keeper of the future. Each of them have their own respective rooms, and each of them have their own respective responsibilities as described. within their own respective sections. Whether the PCs actually get to interact with any of these librarians is really up to you as a DM. It's not necessarily a major plot point within the chapter itself, and they don't really make a lot of suggestions that the PCs necessarily have to meet with them, provided they do not have any of the stone speaker crystals, which which they do cover a little bit in the saying, like what do the PCs need to do to get the stone speaker crystals from them, which may involve the PCs getting into trouble, because if the PCs are not able to convince the librarians that they need the stone speaker crystals, there is the option that they could steal it. But if the theft is found out, then they will most likely be chased away from the library as a whole. Alright, so one interesting thing about the librarian is because of its which I guess you should probably pay attention to in page 155, which is the general features of Gravenhollow. So I suggest you actually read that section first, the sidebar on the general features, before you get into the more curious parts of the library, like the echoes and how the archives are set, because there are a few general things that you should know about Gravenhollow as the PCs enter into it. Mainly a few things is that it's bigger on the inside. There is no the impression that it's supposed to give to the PCs that is the library is supposedly infinite in space. It gives the impression to the PCs that wherever they go, there's always room for keeping more records, and therefore the number of records that is within the library itself is almost ancient and countless. And another thing, that it also gives the impression that when they enter into the library, they've entered into some sort of like demi-plane state. It doesn't explicitly really say so, but it's distant enough from at least the Underdark to give the impression of to give the feeling of safety, as well as not being present in a particular location where space and time the laws of space and time doesn't really apply as much within Gravenhollow in itself. When whoever is within Gravenhollow in itself gains the benefits of a comprehend language spell, so they can basically read whatever records that has been kept within the library in itself, and most likely, based on the description in the book, most likely written in Giant, because all the records are kept in a way that it's only interesting or relevant from a Giant's perspective, at least to Stone Giant's perspective. So that makes information that is found within the library maybe a little bit skewed, but what the book suggests is that it's still relevant enough for the PCs to look for certain kinds of information that they want. And because of this whole disjointed sense of time and space, there's a bunch of things called echoes while the PCs are within Gravenhollow in itself. Echoes, as the book describes it, is basically sort of projections of certain characters who visit Gravenhollow, and these projections can come from different timelines. It can be from the past, present, and future. So there are definitely a lot of interesting NPCs, and the book suggests that this is actually a good place for you to sort of include in some of the more famous NPCs within Forgotten Realms lore. Notably would be Elminster, Bruno Battlehammer, Lustrous Silverhand, but there are also more module specific ones like Hagram. There's a young version of you can actually potentially meet a young version of Hagram, and members of the Society of Brilliance, which is the explanation of why the Society, a member of the Society of Brilliance, would know where the Gravenhollow is. And there is Yaun. Yaun is actually the ancestors of the Stone Giants, who actually made the deal with the King of Gracklestark to sort of bind their service to the Duergars. Then there are some really outlier NPCs that's not particularly related to the NPCs, but may have some significance within the Underdark. For example, like you have Jelinfin Oblodra from one of the houses of Mesoperanzan. Then you have some really random NPCs like Andarin Zareth, a red wizard of Thay who comes from the future, and then the most interesting one will be Gratz himself. So yeah, so these are echoes, and basically the PCs can interact with them, can talk with them. The book gives some suggestions of how the echoes will interact with the PCs as well, in terms of saying things like sometimes some of them may reveal which timeline they are from, and then some may not. Some may choose to hide the information. Some may try to get information from the PCs to know where they are from, and maybe use that to their knowledge of what they require from the library. Then the next section is just some basic information about living quarters. Basically, if the PCs arrive, they will be provided with living quarters, and the living quarters is sufficiently furnished and also supplied with food and water for the PCs to be comfortable and be able to find their way to other areas of the library. And if they need to rest, then they can easily always find their place back into their quarters. And the librarians themselves also maintain their quarters. The book here states that two of the librarians keep their quarters at the topmost area of the library, and then one of them keeps their quarters at the bottom end, at the bottommost part of the library. Although, given the magic space of Gravenhollow itself, that doesn't really mean anything other than relative distance. And I guess like the most obvious implication of knowing where the librarian quarters are is basically if the PCs need to find them, and therefore they need to just go look for them. So the main areas, I would say, of the Gravenhollow library itself is obviously the archives, and the book here states that the archives are basically split into three parts: archives of the past, present, and future. And the PCs would have to go to each type of archive. So I wouldn't necessarily say that only 3 archives. Basically, there can be many rooms, but each room is dedicated to one of the archives. So one other general feature about Gravenhollow is that finding your way around Gravenhollow is not a matter of knowing where the rooms are and just going towards it. If you read under the general features sidebar on page 155, it actually tells you that it's a matter of effort or will. You actually have to make a wisdom check to find that location, and if you actually fail, you actually take a wrong turn, and you must make additional checks until you succeed. But if you have the help of the librarians, then they will actually automatically lead you to the right archives that you need. Basically, it's as each archive's name states. Basically, if the PCs need to find information about the past, then they will need to go to the archive of the past. If they need to find information about the present, obviously they need to go to archives of the present. And if they need to find information about the future, then they need to go to archives of the future. So that's basically it. But the trick here is that going through the records doesn't necessarily, or may not necessarily, provide the information the PCs want, or if you want to really sort of speed things up to get to the heart of the PC's questions, or of what they want to know. The book basically suggests that if the PCs go into any of the archives and they use their Soul Speaker Crystal and they spend a charge of it, they actually get visions. And the visions are basically, and depending on what they are asking, the visions basically pretty much answers whatever they have, or provide them with a vision of something that's related to their event. So the list of possible visions starts at page 157, goes all the way to page 159. So some possible visions is Grom's Folly, which is basically the entire explanation of how the Drow, or basically Grom's Baneray, the Archmage of Menzoberranzan, brought in Demogorgon and accidentally the rest of the other Demon Lords. The visions about Zookmoy's arrival is basically how Zookmoy landed in Neverlight Grove. Jublex and the Pudding King talks about how the Sneflablin meets up with Jublex, and then he's been granted the powers of the Pudding King. Demogorgon's altar is Demogorgon's altar in Slupuduk. or his arrival in Frow's Ubu, and his gem is how Frow's Ubu ended up in Mental Derif. Baphomet, Cyrock lives Hail Orcus. I think this is this is since Orcus is not doesn't have a significant role or appears prominently within the module. This is sort of, I guess, supposed to be like a sideshow of where Orcus ended up with. And Cyrock is actually an elder brain of a mind flayer colony, and basically Orcus just revives the elder brain and basically runs the colony from there. So this is actually a very important or interesting thread for you to pull on if you really want to make Orcus more prominent within the module itself. Baphomet and the Horn King, I guess, pretty much tells you that and it's ended up within the labyrinth area of the Underdark, and it says here that you can actually use it to foreshadow the maze engine, so which we will definitely be talking about when we get into the labyrinth area. Spawn of Yinogu also talks about how he ended up in the Underdark, but they don't really specify exactly where he appears in, except that Yinogu being the Lord of Savagery, and basically how his presence actually allows hyenas to actually turn into gnolls. And then lastly, we have Love, the Demon Queen of Spiders herself, and the vision gives you an idea of how she has benefited with the absence of the demon lords from the abyss. Basically that's the entire meta plot of Out of the Abyss. Basically, Love, according to canon at least, Love tricked Gravenhollow to summon all the demon lords so that she can expand her influence on the abyss, on the different layers of the abyss, since the lords are lost. The main event, I would say, of Gravenhollow, besides the PCs just exploring the different parts of the library, getting information that they need or they want, is actually the enemy of our enemy on page 155, where they meet up with a Drow Archmage, who is not Grompenre, but is actually Vizeran the Veer. According to canon at least, House de Veer, I believe, was the house that was destroyed during the birth of Drizzt Do'Urden, and I believe he was one of the higher ranking houses before it was overthrown by the House Do'Urden. So Vizeran the Veer is, who interestingly enough, if you played in the Baldur's Gate series, is actually the same house with Viconia the Veer. Vizeran the Veer is a outcast archmage or outcast archmage Drow, who is supposedly as powerful as Grompenre, and according to their history at least, is that he was sort of like a classmate with Grompenre, and he was supposedly he would have been archmage of Mental Branson if it were not for the whole destruction of House de Veer, and him not being a particular Loth worshipper as well. So he secretly worships the elemental evil, at least according to what the book describes. He is trying to think of a way to get rid of the matriarchy system in Mental Branson. But his role in the module plays a very significant one, because if the PCs are looking for a way to get rid of the demon lords, Vizeran the Veer actually has one, and this is actually based on his own research while he's doing own research in Gravenhollow. He's confirmed a few facts, he's confirmed a few ideas of how Grompenre brought in the demon lords, and he thinks that he has found a way to unwork it. So while the PCs are exploring Gravenhollow, at some point, whether it's up to you as a DM or through maybe the player's own exploration, so Vizeran the Veer is going to offer them his solution, not openly in detail. He's just going to suggest that he has an idea of what has happened and what he can do about it, and he's going to give the PCs a chance to make a deal in the sense that if they decide to work together with Vizeran the Veer, then he will tell them the way that he has known to reverse the entire summoning of all the demon lords. But he will not reveal any details while Vizeran and the PCs are in Gravenhollow. He will actually invite them to his tower, which is going to be in the next chapter. Yes, it's going to be the next chapter after Gravenhollow, is that he will talk. That's where he will, review the entire plan. Vizeran Devere being a drow, and given his interest against Mazer Branson and Loth, the PCs may have some reservations against working with Vizeran Devere, but you could push things in such a way that if Vizeran Devere's way may be the easiest, but if they still refuse to work with him, then they can always do it the hard way, which is to get rid of the demon lords one by one, or maybe get rid of them en masse, or in however way that you can too. So that's actually, I would say, that's the main event, the offering of a deal and a possible solution of the whole demonic problem within the Underdark. Regardless of what the PC's decisions are, if the moment they leave Gravenhollow, coming to page 159, the PCs will be granted with 5,000 XP each for learning the truth, and also it's where the PCs would move on if they decided to work with Vizeran Devere, which continues into the next chapter. So that's pretty much it for the chapter on chapter 11. So let's get into some general ideas, or what you can do within the chapter in itself. As written, you could say that this is supposed to be a breather chapter in a way, especially if the PCs are coming in from mental derif. But for me, because of the direction that I went, and I pretty much went for the same idea when I was running it with my group, because I did make a chapter 8 I did make the Quantum Group chapter a little bit more challenging and involve a little bit of combat, and the traveling bits were also quite testy for the PCs. So I thought it was a good place for them to recover. So my general recommendations is decide what do the PCs want to know. Ask them the questions ahead of time. And in my case, I sort of remember that I actually used Bruno Bettelhammer to tell the PCs, like, when you go to Gravenhollow, ask these questions. Like, I want to know Bruno Bettelhammer wants to know a few things about the Underdark, and obviously it is what caused the demons to appear, and how did they draw in the demons they brought with them, and obviously is there a solution to the whole problem. So that sort of requires the PC to, number one, get each of the visions of how the demons appeared and the histories of the demon lords in the Underdark, and then obviously the whole deal with Vizeran, if they and that being the possible solution. So that's one way you can go about running the Gravenhollow chapter, is prepare the PCs with some questions that they need to answer, or also ask ahead of time from the players, like, what do they want to know about the entire situation, and then you can tailor the visions and the records they find in the archives according to what they want. And that would be the short version, I would say, of running this chapter. If you just want to keep it within the session or so, talking to the librarians. Obviously, the librarians may, at least how the book suggests, is that the librarians don't necessarily have a omnipotent knowledge about what's happening within their respective timelines. Like, they don't know exactly what happens in the past, present, and future, but they can definitely point the PCs to the right directions. Like, go to this archive if you want to know more about Gracklestock's history, or go to the present archive if you want to know exactly what happened after they left Neverlight Grove, if they actually solve any of the instances there, or go to the archives of the future if they want to know what happens if they do not stop the demon lords, for example, along those lines. The librarians are one way you can actually sort of lead the PCs around. The other way is obviously with the echoes. The echoes, other than having that cool opportunity to interact with the famous NPCs, you could also use the echoes to sort of being the signposts and the guides. Like, if you sense that the players are feeling a bit lost within Gravenhollow, or they're not exactly sure what they need to do, then just drop an echo at them, and let them interact with the echo, and the echo be the ones who tell them, oh, you can go find this somewhere in one of the archives based on whatever information they seek. And if you want to make it really more interesting, you could say, like, based on which timeline the echoes are from, they may or may not be able to answer certain questions that's related to, you know, maybe the future that the Echo doesn't really know about. But if the Echo is from the future, it may be able to answer certain questions about the present. So that can be interesting, but that can be quite daunting and quite tiring, especially as a DM, because you need to like really play the NPCs for one thing, play the famous NPCs for one thing, and then you need to really you need to have your timeline straight. Like you need to know exactly what happens when and which NPCs will be viable to answer those questions based on what the PCs may be asking them. Then there is the visions. Obviously, the visions, some visions are more past related. Like for example, especially like things like Demogorgon's vision about the altar, the Pudding King and Joe Black's visions about the past, Zookmoy's presence in Neverland Grove, but also consider using the visions to foreshadow the future as well. So one example is definitely the Baphomet and his presence with the Maze Engine. You could also foreshadow certain events like the final showdown that can only happen if they go off with Vizeran's plan. And in a way, you could also use that to sort of lead the PCs to believe that the only way they can actually solve the whole thing is by working with Vizeran, or working with Vizeran to an effect that would actually realize that vision. So obviously there's some good future events would be the Demonic Showdown, and where the Demonic Showdown takes place is also a very interesting matter to foreshadow in a way, because according to the book at least, the final showdown can happen in many places, including Mesobranson itself, which actually is the intent of Vizeran. So if the PCs get the impression that it has to happen in Mesobranson, then they will actually play right into the hands of Vizeran's plan. Then obviously there's the visions about the future. You could bring up, maybe it could be Joy Black's and Zookmoy's showdown in the Fetid Wedding, also in one of the later chapters. Yinogu's showdown with the Goristro, I believe, also in the Maze Engine also. Can be one of the foreshadow events that you bring up. So yeah, so consider how to use the visions for both past and present, and maybe in that way you can actually sort of lead the PCs to where you want them to go, sort of, at least give them the foreshadowing to go there. So the other way you can run Gravenhollow, it would be, I would say, the long version, or you could say even more, the more combat heavy version, if you really want to stir up some trouble within Gravenhollow, and not because of some demonic influence of any kind. You know, the way I would go about this, which would be to make Gravenhollow something like a gigantic puzzle. Like if the PCs need to find a certain information, they don't make them do skill checks like the book suggests, but rather that you give them a lead, and the PCs need to be able to find the next piece of information based on asking the right questions, and then going to one or three archives, past, present, or future. This would definitely be a much more painstaking task. Like you have to break up all the known events that you know as a DM, all the future events that is going to happen within the rest of the second half of the adventure module, and really be able to break them up to pieces and feed them one by one to the PCs. Now, obviously, this is obviously not something that a lot of PCs players are going to appreciate. So only go through this method if you feel like this is just for something. If you think they are receptive towards puzzle-like gameplay. Pretty much a major inspiration, I would say, to run the long version of Gravenhollow is basically take the cues from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So if you recall, there was an episode in Avatar: The Last Airbender where Aang and party find a hidden library. I can't remember exactly which season it was. I believe it might have been in season 2, where they actually had to go and find a library, and then that's actually where they discover the way to defeat the Fire Nation. So you can pretty much replicate or make a parallel of this whole, at most, how the Avatar: Last Airbender episode did that. you could pretty much replicate in the same thing, in the sense that they may be getting information that is not necessarily helpful, but then they come to a point where once they meet with Vizeran, then Vizeran is the one who actually sort of like guides, points them into the certain direction that, hey, there is actually a real way for them to really defeat the demon lords, but it comes at a cost. And then you could also make the librarians as similar to in the Avatar episode, is that the librarians are actually very protective of the knowledge that they have collected, and it may not necessarily be for non-giant eyes or not applied for non-giant ways. So if the librarians and the basilisk find out that the piece is actually plundering the knowledge to serve their personal purpose rather than serve the purpose of the stone giants, then there may be some combat involved with the stone giants and the basilisk, and they will have to like run away from the library after they've gotten the information that they need, or after they've spoken with Vizeran. So that becomes a different type of session for Gravenhollow in itself, because it may involve some running, some combat, and obviously given the magical nature of the library itself, the PCs are probably not in a position to win the combat in any way. So it's more of a matter of surviving and running away and finding the information that they need within the same period of time. So I guess that's pretty much how you can do Gravenhollow, and that's pretty much what Gravenhollow wants you to do in a sense. So these are all just general ideas, as I said in this, as I always say in my podcast videos. These are all general ideas. I'm showing you the moving parts. I'm showing you what's important, what's not important within Gravenhollow. This is a very good place for you to do your exposition and your info dump about the entire scenario that's happening within the Underdark, and also what the PCs can do about it. Use it whatever way you will, whatever intent you will, also for the PCs. Once the PCs have made up their mind, generally I would say they can actually, after leaving Gravenhollow, they can basically go two places. They can actually go to Vizeran, which is the next chapter, obviously, and then or they can go back to Gontogrim and then consult with King Bruenor of what's the next steps now that they have gathered the knowledge that he seeks, and whether they have a solution to the whole Demon Lord problem. So yes, Gravenhollow is an important chapter in terms of its how it expands knowledge of the PCs regarding the whole situation. So it's something that you should really probably put a bit more thought into, because if the PCs decided not to work with Vizeran, then the next chapter is pretty much useless, and then you will need to think about a way to retrofit the chapters following after Vizeran's plan back to, without depending on Vizeran meeting with Vizeran happening or being a fruitful meeting with the PCs. So yeah, so that would be all I think for tonight and for this chapter, and this would most likely be the last video I'll be doing for 2019. So I would see you in the next video for Prep Quest, most likely in 2020, which we will get into Vizeran's, or the Tower of Vengeance, chapter 12. So this is the Questing GM signing out for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.